While the world screams, the wise man keeps silent, and in that silence he wins. We live in an era where everyone has their say, everyone reacts. Everyone wants to have the last word. But almost no one dominates the most powerful of the silent strategies. Today, you will discover why silence is not weakness. It is not Martinez. It is not insecurity. Is power. And not just any power, is the kind of power that Aurelius practiced in the midst of wars, betrayals, and chaos. Stay until the end, because you will understand something that can change your shape. To respond forever? Silence has always been underestimated by those who confuse noise with power. In a society where every second someone tries to impose themselves with opinions, criticism, or provocation, keeping silent seems almost like an act of... But the great thinkers of history understood something that most are still unaware of. Silence is not empty, it is space. Is the space where the mind observes before reacting, where reason is strengthened before speaking, and where character is revealed without the need for words. A man who controls his tongue demonstrates that he first has begun to control his mind, and that changes completely the dynamics of power in any situation. While others rush to respond, to justify, a defender su ego. The man who dominates silence observes more, understands more, and acts more accurately. In silence, emotions lose speed and clarity appears. It is no coincidence that the most influential philosophers of antiquity appreciate both the moments of stillness and knew that true strength is not demonstrated by the speed with which you respond, but in the dark with which you choose when to do so. Silence well used is not absence, is strategy. Noise is not accidental. Social networks are designed to provoke you. News is designed to alarm you. Debates are designed to divide you into why. Because a reactive person is predictable, and a predictable person is manipulable. Every time you react without thinking, you lose clarity, you lose energy, you lose control, you lose... Epictetus said it crudely. It is not things that disturb us, but our opinions about them. But if there is no silence, there is no room to choose your opinion. Automatic reaction only. Silence creates a pause, and pause creates power. Most people, lives trapped in a cycle, constant of and reactions. A comment provokes a response. A criticism provokes defense. A provocation provokes anger. And so on without realizing it. People spend a large part of their lives reacting to external forces that control your mental state. This mechanism is precisely what the Stoics sought to break. They understood that true power is not in control of the world, but in controlling the way you respond to it. When you react impulsively, you give your peace of mind to any person, the universe that manages to alter you. But when you enter a moment of silence between stimulus and response, something changes profoundly. That little space becomes a territory of mental freedom. At that instant, you can choose, you can analyze, you can decide if something really deserves your energy or simply deserves to be ignored. And that difference is enormous. Because while the world tries to push you constantly towards the reaction, the sage learns to move calmly in chaos. Not because the noise disappears, but because his mind no longer depends on him. Imagine being emperor of Rome, plagas, invasions, internal betrayals, constant political pressure. Marcus Aurelius did not have social networks, but I had an entire empire watching it, and yet wrote in silence, meditated in silence, made decisions from the calm. He understood something fundamental. If the leader loses internal control, he loses everything. Instead of reacting in anger, he reflected. Instead of speaking impulsively, observed. His greatest weapon was not the army, it was his mind, disciplined, and that discipline began with silence. Rule an empire does not only demand military strength or political intelligence, requires mental stability. Extraordinary. Marcus Aurelius inaugurated challenges that would have been broken to most leaders. Endless wars, devastating epidemics, internal representations, and the constant pressure to govern millions of people. Sin embargo, what makes his figure truly extraordinary? It is not only his power as emperor, but his discipline as a thinker. While many rulers reportedly reacted with paranoia, anger, or despair, Marcus Aurelius resorted to silence as a tool of clarity. In his personal writings that were never intended to be published, reflected on the nature of the ego, control of emotions, and the importance of maintaining the mind. Aligned with reason, that habit of introspection allowed him to make decisions with greater serenity, even in the midst of chaos. So leadership was not based solely on external authority, but in an internal domain that few reach. And that domain began precisely with the ability to stop, observing and thinking before acting. Silence did not weaken his leadership, strengthened it. Let me ask you something important. How many times this week you reacted impulsively? In a message, in a discussion, in a comment? If this message is already making you think differently, subscribe now to Stoic Foundation. Here we train character. Here we train internal mastery, and like us, if you have ever lost energy in responding too fast, if you reflect honestly, you will probably remember several recent situations in which you reacted too fast. Maybe you replied to a message with, you entered into an unnecessary discussion, or you defended your point of view more intensely, of which it was necessary. These moments seem small but accumulated over time, consume an enormous amount of mental energy. Every impulsive reaction leaves a small trace of emotional sadness. That is why the Stoics trained his mind to create a conscious pause before responding. Not because they avoided conflicts, but because they understood that not all conflicts deserve attention. When you develop the ability to stop for an instant before reacting, you start to view situations from a broader perspective. What once seemed urgent ceases to be so. What seemed offensive loses intensity. And many discussions, they simply cease to be important. This ability does not arise overnight. It is a discipline that is cultivated with constant practice. But when you begin to master it, you discover something surprising. A large part of the battles you used to fight were never really necessary. In a discussion, the one who speaks the most usually weakens first. Why? Because it reveals insecurity. Silence in a conversation does something powerful. Creates tension, and tension forces the other to expose himself. Observes truly influential leaders. They talk little, they hear a lot. Do not interrupt, do not justify themselves, do not rush. Silence projects confidence, control, security. When you don't need to talk to validate, you demonstrate power. In the social field, silence has a psychological effect. Powerful. When a person talks non-stop to defend himself, justify or impose yourself, usually reveals much more than you imagine. In Spanish, need for approval, fear of losing control of the conversation. Instead, he who dominates the silence creates a completely different dynamic. Silence generates sadness, forces the other to fill the space, In the social field, silence has a psychological effect. Powerful. When a person talks non-stop to defend himself, justify or impose yourself usually reveals much more than you imagine. In Spanish, need for approval. Fear of losing control of the conversation. Instead, he who dominates the silence creates a completely different dynamic. Silence was terrible. Forces the other to fill the space. And many times when trying to do so, the other person ends up revealing more information than it intended to. The big negotiators, strategists and leaders understand this principle intuitively. Listen more than they talk. Observe gestures, tones of voice, micro-expressions. While the others try to win the discussion with words, they gain understanding with patience. This type of presence conveys security because it shows that there is a desperate need to convince or impose oneself. When someone can remain silent without discomfort, projects a form of trust that is difficult to ignore. No need to raise your voice or master the conversation. Its simple calm already communicates authority. But the most important silence, it is not external, it is internal. You can be quiet and have a screaming mind. True silence is mental order, is to observe a thought without letting it drag you away. Yes, receive a provocation without turning it into emotion. Uncontrolled is to remember that not everything deserves your answer. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not on external events." Silence is the bridge to that power. External silence is only the first step. The real challenge appears when we try to silence the noise within our own mind. Constant thoughts, concerns, memories, anticipations. The human mind rarely stops completely. The Stoics did not intend to eliminate these thoughts because they knew that it is impossible. Instead, trained the ability to observe them without being trapped in them. This difference is fundamental to a mind without discipline. Is by every thought that appears, as if every idea were an order to be followed. But a trained mind learns to look at those thoughts with a certain distance. You can recognize them, analyze them, and let them pass, without allowing them to define their emotional state. This kind of inner silence does not mean total absence of thought, but conscious presence means that the mind no longer reacts automatically to each internal stimulus. And when you reach that level of clarity, external provocations lose much of their power over you. The world will continue to scream, will continue to give their opinion, will continue to provoke, but you can choose something different. You can choose not to react. You can choose not to enter every battle. You can choose to respond only when it is strategic. Silence is not absence, is a controlled presence, is emotional intelligence in action, is mastery. And when you master your response, you dominate your life. Remember this: while they scream, you win in silence. Welcome to Stoic Foundation. At the end, the silence is not simply a communication technique or a social strategy. It is a form of personal discipline that transforms the way you experience the world. When you learn to master your pants, something changes profoundly in your daily life. Provocations lose strength and unnecessary discussions disappear. Decisions become clearer. You start to move through life with a sense of internal control, that it does not depend on what others say or do. This does not mean that you never speak up or avoid. Express your ideas means that you choose carefully when to do so. Your words stop being impulsive and become deliberate. And this difference is immediately perceived. Because in a world full of noise, conscious silence, stands out as a rare form of intelligence. Who dominates his silence shows that first has learned to master himself. And when a person reaches that level of self-control, discover something the Stoics understood centuries ago. The real power was never to make more noise than the others, but not needing to do so. If this message resonated with you and invited you to see the power of silence from a new perspective, support us with a like, subscribe to Stoic Foundation, and share this video with someone who is also looking for dominate your mind and strengthen its character. Your support helps us to continue creating content that inspires discipline, clarity, and stoic harmony